My name is Nala Roth. They say you never truly know someone until they betray you. I used to believe that love, real love, was unshakable. That trust, once built, was a foundation strong enough to weather anything. I thought I understood the people closest to me. I thought I understood myself. But I was wrong, so very, very wrong. I had the kind of life that most people would call normal. A loving family, good friends, a future that felt bright and full of possibility. And then, everything changed. Not suddenly, not all at once, but piece by piece. A crack here, a shadow there, small things that seemed insignificant at the time. But looking back now, I realize those were the signs. The signs that my world was already falling apart before I ever saw it coming. This is not just a story about betrayal. It's a story about lies, about trust shattered beyond repair, about how the people we love the most can become the ones who hurt us in ways we never imagined. This is the story of how I lost everything, and found myself in the process. Before we begin, I want to warn you that this story contains mature themes. It deals with the challenges of infidelity, betrayal, and emotional turmoil. If these topics make you uncomfortable, you might want to stop watching now. But if you stay, I promise you this will be an experience you won't forget. Looking back, I can see it now, the way the cracks were already forming beneath the surface, how the illusion of my life was just that, an illusion. But at the time? At the time, everything felt almost perfect. I was 18, standing at the edge of everything I had ever known. My senior year was nearly over, and for the first time in my life, I felt like I was in control of my own future. College applications were sent, acceptance letters were rolling in, and my biggest worries were things like exams and weekend plans. I was bright, ambitious, and full of hope. Everyone told me I had the world at my feet. But there was something else too. Something I didn't like to admit, even to myself. I was lonely. Not in the obvious, dramatic way that makes people worry about you. No, my loneliness was subtle, quiet. The kind that creeps in when no one is looking. The kind that hides behind a smile, behind laughter, behind the endless distractions of everyday life. My parents, Roy Norton and Kylie Harmon, were good people. Hardworking, successful. The kind of parents who provided everything I could ever need, at least on paper. But in reality? They were absent. Physically there sometimes, but emotionally? They were always somewhere else. Caught up in their own worlds, their own priorities. Business trips, charity events, vacations that never seemed to include me. And after a while, I stopped asking to go. Stopped expecting anything different. I was their only child, but I never really felt like one. More like a tenant in their house, a guest in their lives. They loved me, I know they did. But love and presence aren't the same thing. And that's where Mrs. Pitts came in. Jones Pitts. My English teacher. My mentor. My closest confidant. She wasn't like the other teachers. She had this presence about her, calm but firm, intelligent but never condescending. She saw people. Really saw them. And somehow, she had seen me when no one else did. It started small. She helped me with my writing back when I was struggling in junior year. Then she started checking in, offering encouragement, pushing me to do better. And before I knew it, stopping by her office after school became a habit. It wasn't even about academics anymore. We would talk. About books, about life, about the things that mattered. And the things that didn't. I trusted her. More than I trusted anyone. She made me feel seen. Valued. Important. And maybe that's why I never questioned the way she always seemed to be there for me. The way she paid attention, remembered the little things, asked about my day in a way that felt genuine. At the time, I thought I was lucky to have her in my life. I had no idea how much I would come to regret it. At first, I didn't notice the change. Or maybe I did, but I didn't want to see it for what it was. Mrs. Pitts had always been the kind of person who had everything together. At least, that's how she seemed. Always polished, always composed. The kind of woman who never let the world see her crack. But then, she started cracking. It was subtle at first. The way she would stare off into space in the middle of grading papers. The tired look in her eyes that hadn't been there before. The small, quiet sighs that slipped out when she thought no one was listening. It wasn't something most people would pick up on, but I wasn't most people. I noticed. Because she had taught me to notice. And then there was the other thing, the way she had started treating me. It wasn't bad, not really. If anything, it felt nice. Safe. But there was something about it that I couldn't quite put into words. A closeness that felt different from before. It wasn't just that she was invested in my success, she had always been that way. But now, it was more than that. The questions she asked went beyond school, beyond my future. They were personal. About my home life, my emotions, my fears. About things I had never talked about with anyone. And when I answered, she listened in a way that no one else ever had. It made me feel seen. Understood. And for someone who had spent most of her life feeling invisible, that kind of attention? It was intoxicating. I told myself it was normal. That I was just imagining things. That it was just kindness. That's what she was, after all, kind. Caring. Protective. There was nothing wrong with that. I wanted to believe that. Then, things started shifting in ways I couldn't ignore. She would check in on me constantly, texting me after school, asking if I was okay, if I needed anything. At first, I thought it was sweet. Thought it was just part of who she was. But then I started wondering. Did she do this with other students? Was I just another person she helped, or was I different? She made me feel like I was different. And maybe that's why I ignored the way she started opening up to me, too. How she would mention, in passing, how difficult things were at home. How tired she was. How she didn't feel appreciated. How sometimes, she felt like no one really saw her. It was almost funny, in a way. She had spent so much time making me feel seen, and now, she wanted me to do the same for her. And then, the moment that changed everything. It was after school, a Friday afternoon, just like any other. I had stopped by her classroom, like I always did, expecting nothing more than our usual conversation. But something was off that day. She was different. Distracted, tense. Her hands clenched a little too tightly around her pen, her jaw a little too stiff when she smiled. And then her phone buzzed. It was just a text. Just a tiny, insignificant message. But the way she reacted to it? That was anything but normal. She glanced at her phone and went completely still. Her face drained of color, her fingers tightening around the device like she was holding on to something fragile, something dangerous. And then, before I could even think, she locked the screen and set it face down on the desk. I shouldn't have thought anything of it. It was just a message. But in that moment, I knew in my gut, that whoever had texted her, it wasn't just anyone. I should have walked away then. I should have known that whatever was happening, whatever she was hiding, it wasn't something I was ready for. But I didn't walk away. I stayed. After that day, something inside me changed. I told myself it was nothing. Just a message. Just a moment. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, something inside me wouldn't let it go. Because Mrs. Pitts was different after that. I don't know if I was imagining it, if maybe I had never really paid attention before, but suddenly, everything about her felt off. The way she glanced over her shoulder when she thought no one was watching. The way she kept checking her phone, but never in front of me. The way her smile didn't reach her eyes anymore. And then there were the calls. She never used to take calls during school hours. But now? Now, there were moments where she would slip out of the room, phone pressed to her ear, voice low, face tense. And every time she came back, she would act like nothing had happened. I wanted to believe it was nothing. But it didn't feel like nothing. And then I started hearing things. Whispers. Small, insignificant comments that shouldn't have meant anything, but together, they started forming a picture I didn't like. Have you noticed how distracted she is lately? She's been leaving early a lot. Must be some personal stuff. I saw her at the bookstore the other day. She wasn't alone. None of it meant anything on its own. But when you put them all together, it started to feel like a puzzle I wasn't supposed to solve. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I wanted to know the answer. It was a Saturday afternoon. I hadn't planned to be there. I was just killing time, waiting for a friend who had texted last minute to cancel. And then, through the window, I saw her. Mrs. Pitts. Sitting at a small table near the back of the cafe, hands wrapped around a coffee cup, shoulders tense. And she wasn't alone. Roberto LeBlanc. I didn't know him well, just a name I had heard in passing. A friend of my father's, I think. Someone who had been around at family gatherings, shaking hands and making small talk. Someone who shouldn't have been sitting across from my teacher with that look in his eyes. It wasn't just a normal conversation. I could tell from the way they sat. Too close, leaning in like they didn't want to be overheard. From the way her fingers played with the rim of her cup, like she was trying to keep her hands from shaking. From the way his gaze lingered on her just a little too long, like they were connected by something unspoken. This wasn't just a meeting. This was something else. And for the first time, I had to ask myself a question I never thought I would. What was Mrs. Pitts hiding? I should have let it go. I should have walked out of that cafe and told myself it was none of my business. That whatever was happening between Mrs. Pitts and Roberto LeBlanc had nothing to do with me. But I couldn't. Because something inside me had already changed. It wasn't just curiosity anymore. It wasn't just the need to know. It was something deeper, something I couldn't name. A feeling like betrayal, but different. Heavier. Like a thread pulling too tight, threatening to unravel everything I thought I knew. And so, I did the worst thing I could have done. I started paying attention. At first, it was small things. Little details that shouldn't have mattered, but suddenly did. Mrs. Pitts was leaving school earlier than usual. Not much, just a few minutes here and there, but enough to notice. Enough to wonder where she was going. Her phone was always on silent now. She kept it close, guarded, like it held something fragile, something dangerous. And then there were the glances. The way she would scan the hallways before stepping out of her office. The way her eyes flickered with something unreadable whenever I mentioned Roberto's name. And I hated it. I hated the way it made me feel. Like I was losing something before I even knew what it was. The first time I actually heard them together was an accident. I hadn't meant to be there. I was walking past an empty classroom, heading toward the library, when I heard voices, low, urgent whispers drifting through the cracked door. And then I heard her name. Mrs. Pitts. You need to be more careful, Roberto said. This can't keep happening. A long silence. Then Mrs. Pitts' voice, quieter, shaken. I know. But I can't just stop. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Because I didn't know what they were talking about, not really, but I knew it was wrong. I knew it was something I wasn't supposed to hear. And suddenly, all the little things, the messages, the tension, the secrecy, clicked into place. Mrs. Pitts was having an affair. But it wasn't just that. It was the way she said it. The way her voice cracked, the way she sounded, desperate. Like whatever this was, it wasn't just some mistake. It was something deeper. Something dangerous. And for the first time, I didn't just feel betrayed. I felt scared. I spent the next few days trying to push it down, trying to pretend like none of it mattered. But it did. It mattered too much. Because now, every time I looked at her, I didn't see the woman I had trusted for years. I saw someone I didn't recognize. Someone who had secrets. Someone who was lying. And the worst part? I didn't know what hurt more, that she was keeping things from me, or that it had nothing to do with me at all. I thought about confronting her. About just asking. But what would I even say? That I had been following her? That I had been listening in on her conversations? No. I couldn't do that. I had already gone too far. But not far enough. The message came late that night. My phone buzzed once, the screen lighting up in the darkness of my room. I expected it to be nothing. But when I picked it up, when I saw the words staring back at me, my stomach dropped. You deserve to know the truth. Someone else knew. I should have ignored the message. I should have deleted it, thrown my phone across the room, and forced myself to forget. But I didn't. Because whoever sent it was right, I did deserve to know the truth. Even if that truth was something I wasn't ready for. The message had no name. No number. Just those 6 words, waiting for me in the dead of night, daring me to ask the question I had been running from since the moment I saw Mrs. Pitts in that cafe. Who was she hiding? I don't know what I expected when I replied. Maybe an answer. Maybe nothing at all. But what I got was an address. Just a street name, a time. No explanation. No warning. Just coordinates leading me towards something I couldn't turn away from. And the worst part? I went. Because deep down, I already knew. I didn't have proof, not yet, but something inside me had already put the pieces together. The secrecy. The way she was always looking over her shoulder. The way Roberto LeBlanc, my father's so-called friend, always seemed to be circling her like a vulture. And now, I was about to find out the truth. Whether I was ready for it or not. The address led me to a house I didn't recognize. Not far from my own neighborhood, but just far enough to be hidden. A place no one would think to look. I remember standing across the street, my hands clenched into fists, my pulse hammering in my ears. The windows were dark, except for one, soft, warm light spilling through the curtains, shadows shifting inside. Someone was home. Someone was waiting. And then I saw them. Mrs. Pitts, and my father. I thought I had prepared myself for anything. Thought maybe I had overreacted, imagined things that weren't there. But there they were, standing too close, speaking in hushed tones like the world outside didn't exist. Like nothing else mattered except for whatever was happening between them. And then, he touched her. Just his hand on her waist, barely anything at all. But the way she leaned into it? The way he looked at her? It was enough. I think that's the moment I stopped breathing. Everything else faded after that. The sounds, the streetlights, even my own heartbeat. It was like watching a scene in a movie, except I was in it, and I couldn't turn it off. Mrs. Pitts, my teacher, my mentor, the person I had trusted more than anyone, was sleeping with my father. My father, Roy Norton, the man who had spent years pretending to be the perfect husband, the perfect father, was having an affair with the only person outside my family I had ever truly looked up to. And suddenly, I wasn't Nala Roth anymore. I was just a girl standing on a sidewalk, watching her world collapse. I don't remember how I got home that night. I must have walked, but I couldn't feel my legs. Couldn't feel anything except the hollow space where my heart used to be. Betrayal is a strange thing. You expect it to be loud, violent, something that shatters the world in an instant. But it wasn't like that. It was quiet. Numbing. Like drowning in slow motion and knowing no one is coming to save you. I sat in my room for hours, staring at nothing, replaying what I had seen over and over again, hoping, praying, that somehow I had been wrong. That there was another explanation. That the man standing too close to Mrs. Pitts wasn't my father. That the look in her eyes wasn't what I thought it was. But I wasn't wrong. I had seen everything. And no matter how much I wanted to erase it, the truth was there. permanent, unforgiving. How could she do this? Mrs. Pitts, my teacher, my friend, the person who had been there for me when no one else was, how could she look me in the eye every day and pretend like nothing was happening? And my father, God, my father. The man who had spent years teaching me about loyalty, about honesty, about what it meant to be a good person. Was it all a lie? Was I just another fool who believed in something that never existed? I wanted to scream. Wanted to break something. Wanted to make them feel even an ounce of the pain that was ripping me apart. But more than anything, I wanted to understand why. I couldn't let this go. Not without proof. Not without knowing the full extent of what they had done. So I did what I had to do. I started watching. Listening. Taking notes on every interaction, every lie, every moment they thought no one was paying attention. I found text messages, late-night exchanges, carefully deleted but not careful enough. I overheard whispers in the hallway, words that didn't belong to a teacher and a student's father. And the pictures. God, the pictures. I thought I was ready for the truth. But seeing it? Seeing the undeniable proof that the people I trusted most had been lying to me for who knows how long? That broke something inside me that I don't think will ever heal. What do you do when the people who are supposed to protect you are the ones who hurt you the most? Do you stay silent? Pretend like you don't know, let them keep living their lie while you slowly lose yourself in the weight of their deception? Do you tell your mother? Destroy the family that was already hanging by a thread? Watch her face as she realizes the man she built a life with has been unfaithful, not just with anyone, but with someone she trusted. Or do you confront them? Demand answers? Make them see what they've done, make them feel it? I knew what I had to do. I didn't text. I didn't call. I wanted to see her face when she realized I knew everything. The next morning, I walked into school, past my classmates, past the teachers, past the life I used to have before all of this. And then I walked straight into Mrs. Pitt's office, slammed the door behind me, and looked her dead in the eyes. Tell me the truth, I said. Tell me everything. Mrs. Pitts always told me words had power. That if you wanted to be heard, you had to choose them carefully, deliver them with precision. So when I walked into her office that morning, when I slammed the door shut behind me and locked eyes with the woman I had trusted for years, I made sure my words were sharp enough to cut. Tell me the truth, I said. Tell me everything. Mrs. Pitts stared at me, blinking like she didn't understand. Like the walls weren't already caving in around her. But I saw it, the flicker of fear in her eyes, the way her breath hitched ever so slightly. She knew. She knew exactly what I was talking about. I don't know what you mean, Nala, she said, too quickly. Too practiced. The kind of lie that had been told before. But I wasn't here to play games. I reached into my bag, pulled out my phone, and placed it on her desk. One tap of the screen, and the evidence flashed before her eyes, messages, photos, moments she thought had been hidden away forever. I know everything, I said. So stop pretending. Her face went pale. Her fingers twitched like she wanted to reach for the phone, to erase the proof, to make this all go away. But there was no escaping this. No carefully crafted excuse that could make this disappear. Nala, she started, but I cut her off. Why? The word came out raw, desperate. I hated the way my voice cracked, the way the pain clawed its way to the surface, despite the rage burning inside me. Why him? Why my father? She opened her mouth, closed it. I saw the battle happening behind her eyes, the struggle between truth and damage control. And then, she tried to justify it. It wasn't supposed to happen, she said. I didn't mean for it to. Oh, so that makes it okay? I shot back. You didn't mean to? You just, what? Tripped and fell into an affair? You don't understand, Nala, she whispered. Your father, he was lonely. I was lonely. It just happened. Something inside me snapped. I slammed my fist on her desk so hard that a picture frame tipped over, glass clattering against wood. I didn't care. I wanted to scream. To make her feel the weight of what she had done. To make her understand that her loneliness didn't justify destroying my family. You were supposed to be my teacher, I spat. You were supposed to be my friend. I trusted you. I didn't give her a chance to respond. I grabbed my phone, stormed out of her office, and headed straight home. If she thought she was the only one who had explaining to do, she was about to be proven wrong. Because my father? He was next. I found him in the kitchen, drinking his coffee like it was just another morning. Like the world wasn't about to collapse around him. We need to talk, I said, voice tight. He barely looked up. Can it wait, sweetheart? I have a meeting. No. It can't wait. What's wrong? He asked, too casual. Too forced. I pulled out my phone. Same as before. Same evidence, same proof. I didn't need to say anything. His face drained of color. Where did you get this? He asked, voice barely above a whisper. That's what you're worried about? I scoffed. Not the fact that you've been lying to Mom? Not the fact that you've been sneaking around with my teacher? You want to know where I got the proof? He tried to deny it, at first. Tried to tell me it wasn't what it looked like, that I didn't understand. But I did. I understood perfectly. Because cheaters always have excuses. Always have ways of twisting the truth into something they can live with. But I wasn't interested in his excuses. I was interested in the truth. Does Mom know? I asked, voice sharp as a blade. His silence was my answer. She's going to. I had spent my whole life thinking my family was built on something real. Something strong. But in the end, it had all been a lie. And I was about to set it all on fire. Some truths don't set you free. Some truths just destroy everything in their path. I thought telling my mother would be the hardest part. I thought I had prepared myself for the fallout, for the way her world would collapse just like mine had. But nothing could have prepared me for what it felt like to watch it happen. She was sitting in the living room when I told her. A cup of tea in her hands, flipping absent-mindedly through a magazine. It was such a normal scene, such a peaceful moment. And I took it away from her. Mom, we need to talk. She must have heard something in my voice, because she set the cup down carefully, like she already knew whatever I was about to say was going to break her. And then I told her. I told her everything. At first, she didn't react. She just sat there, perfectly still, staring at me like she was waiting for the punchline to a cruel joke. And then, the color drained from her face, her hands trembled, and the silence stretched so long, I thought maybe she had stopped breathing. No, she whispered. Not Roy. Not her. Like saying their names out loud would make it real. As if it wasn't real already. I don't know what I expected her to do. Scream? Cry? Throw something? But she didn't do any of that. She just deflated. Like everything inside her had been ripped away in an instant. She covered her mouth, like she could push the sobs back down, like she could hold herself together for just a little longer. But she couldn't. Because this wasn't just betrayal. This was humiliation. This was loss. This was her whole life unraveling at the seams. And I was the one who had pulled the thread. I'm sorry, I whispered, but the words felt useless. Too small for the damage I had caused. I had to tell you. No, you didn't. I felt it then, the shift. The way she looked at me, not with anger, but with something worse. Sadness. Grief. And maybe, just maybe, a hint of blame. After that, everything happened fast. Like a hurricane tearing through our lives, leaving nothing but wreckage in its wake. Mrs. Pitts was exposed. Someone reported the affair to the school board, maybe my mother, maybe someone else. It didn't matter. By Monday, she was gone. Suspended. Under investigation. Career in ruins. My father was kicked out. My mother didn't say a word when she packed his bags, just left them by the door, her face blank, her hands trembling. He tried to talk to her, tried to talk to me, but we were past that. There were no words that could fix this. No explanations that could undo what he had done. And me? I thought I would feel relief. Satisfaction. Justice. But I didn't feel any of those things. I just felt empty. I used to think the truth was the most important thing. That if you knew something terrible, you had to expose it. That lies were meant to be torn apart, no matter the cost. But now, looking at the pieces of my broken family, at my mother's hollow eyes, at the silence that had replaced everything we used to be, I had to wonder. Had I done the right thing? Or had I just made everything worse? Because the betrayal had destroyed my family. But could I have lived with the lie? The house is quiet now. Too quiet. It used to be filled with life, with movement, with the sounds of a family existing together, even if it was all a lie. But now? Now, it's just my mother and me, circling each other like ghosts, like two people who don't know how to fill the space that's been left behind. We don't talk about him. We don't talk about her. We don't talk about anything that hurts. But the silence is filled with all the things we refuse to say. People at school look at me differently now. Some whisper, some avoid me altogether. I hear the rumors, the speculation, the pity in their voices. Like I'm some tragic character in a story they can't look away from. Mrs. Pitts is gone. No one knows if she's coming back. Some teachers pretend like she never existed, like erasing her name from the faculty board will erase what she did. But I remember. I will always remember. And my father, he tries. Calls. Leave messages. Ask if we can talk. But I don't know what to say to him. He was supposed to be my father. Now he's just another stranger I don't trust. People think betrayal is just about lies. About cheating, about deception. But it's more than that. Betrayal is the moment you look at someone and realize they are not who you thought they were. It's the moment you understand that love isn't always enough to keep people honest. That loyalty isn't always as strong as temptation. It's knowing that the people who were supposed to protect you, the ones you trusted the most, are the ones who put the knife in your back. Some betrayals change you forever. But sometimes, the worst betrayals are the ones that teach you who you really are. I used to think the truth would fix everything. That once the lies were gone, once the betrayal was exposed, the world would somehow make sense again. But that's not how it works. The truth doesn't heal. The truth doesn't erase the pain. The truth just exists. It's what you do with it that matters. And I was done letting it hold me prisoner. I don't know where my father is now. I don't ask. I don't need to know. Maybe one day, I'll be ready to listen to his explanations, his apologies. But not today. And Mrs. Pitts? She's just a name now. A ghost of a person I once admired. A lesson I never wanted to learn. As for my mother and me, we are still learning how to exist in this new world. Some days, it's easier. Some days, the silence is too much. But we are here. We are surviving. And me? I am not the same girl who walked into that classroom all those weeks ago, looking for answers. She was naive. She believed in unbreakable things. Now, I know better. The hardest truths don't destroy you. They set you free. They strip you bare, leave you raw, force you to see the world for what it really is. And when the dust settles, when the wreckage is behind you, when the pain stops being the only thing you feel, you are left with something else. You are left with yourself. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough. Betrayal doesn't destroy you. It reveals who you were meant to become.